All right, so we're going to start off focusing on the community rating system. So this one is mostly targeted to Ivy and Rich. And this individual would like to know about the benefits and opportunities with this incentive program.
Do you want to start?
The community rating system allows for a community to go beyond the, let me put it this way. It rewards individuals who live in a community where they go beyond the minimum National Flood Insurance Program regulations, and they actually get it's a point system, and the community is rated by that point system, and citizens who have flood insurance actually get their flood insurance premiums discounted. Anything to add to that?
Yes, it's done at the community level. It's a decision by the community officials whether or not to participate in the program. One of the things that a lot of communities are not necessarily aware of is that there are what's called uniform statewide credit for measures such as our Wetlands Protection Act, which has fairly strict regulations, some aspects of our state building code, and that enables most communities to start off pretty much with a 5% discount on the premiums just on the basis of those statewide measures, and then they can go higher based on what the community implements.
Go ahead, Ed.
Could I add? We know in this nation how to reduce risks. We've been doing it for over 100 years with respect to urban fires. And we did it based upon individual risk rating of communities based on their ability to deal with fires. We know how to do this. There's a great publication that came out from FEMA called America Burning Recommissioned Roman numeral II that talks about this as a thought for going forward with a resilience and scoring, as Cynthia suggested, where we would have one community that actually was really seriously thinking about resilience and another community that was not, and this community would get rewards in terms of insurance risk rating, and the other community would certainly not be punished, but would not get those same rewards. And I think that part of the core of what we've been talking about within the American Bar Association is coming up with a program of catastrophic insurance, where you would have communities that you would get an insurance policy that included catastrophic risk, and that would be scored based upon what Cynthia suggested in terms of a resilience rating. We know how to do this. It's just a matter of doing it.
Thank you. Ivy, we have a question for you about flood insurance mapping. This individual is curious if you're anticipating climate ever being incorporated into the flood insurance rate maps in a more proactive way.
You want to start or you want me to start?
I'm going to I'll let Rich start that off.
Okay.
Okay, as I mentioned in my presentation, the sort of issue for the flood insurance program is the multiple current uses of flood insurance maps in terms of both an insurance document and then as a planning document. And I know there's a group at FEMA that's working on evaluating how best to incorporate climate change into the maps. And I think, and this is just my own personal opinion or guess of where it's likely to go, is that there would most likely be essentially additional lines put on the maps where you would basically say, here is what the flood risk looks like today for the purposes of insurance. Here's what the flood risk would look somewhere down the road, and you'd have to determine a baseline. Is it 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, whatever that may be? What will that flood risk look at that period based on projections of climate change? There's a lot that goes into that. I think you heard probably a lot yesterday about different models and how you might measure it. So as with any government program, there would be a lot of work, a lot of negotiation as to what that would look like. But I think the process is beginning now.
Just one quick additional point on that question. I think it's just critical that we all remember that where we go with climate change is not yet predetermined. that the biggest variable in terms of climate change is the degree to which we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So whenever we look at scenarios, it's really based on concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So let's just remember, we won't want to give up the fight here before we need to.
Right. And if I can also add to that, if you want to do something today, tomorrow, freeboard above the minimum standards of the National Flood Insurance Program is an absolute requirement. My personal suggestion is 4 feet everywhere. 4 feet of freeboard. It's economically justified, and it will certainly, until we settle this and we see where we're going on the climate change and what we're going to do, if anything, to reduce greenhouse gases, 4 feet of freeboard is economically justified, and it's a good thought, and I think it has to do with the standard of care for architects and engineers too, hint, hint.
If I could respond to that, Ed, I think that's a fabulous idea, and I want to add something to what you said about the building code and the limitations on local governments. You're absolutely right in that currently, because we have a uniform statewide building code, communities cannot require additional freeboard, but they certainly have the ability to encourage it. One town, the town of Hull, has instituted a program where they provide incentives to people who elevate higher, who use freeboard, and in the means of reduced permit fees. And I think that's been fairly successful. So even though a community can't require that very important measure of building in the freeboard, I think there are ways that we can get around that until such time as we can build it into the code.
And if I can add to that, my friends in that are trial lawyers would also be very happy to give you some encouragement there. Remember, we talked about forensic hydrology and hydraulics and standard of care and litigation. It is my professional judgment that someone who is designing a critical facility and does not include significant freeboard for that critical facility is well outside any normal standard of care in the civilized world.
So what I want to do is change the question, because I don't think the question should be about what is FEMA going to do with their maps. I think the question is, how do the communities want to look at what's going on in their communities? What do they want it to look in the future? And what tool are you going to use to inform citizens of their risk?
Well said.
Thank you. Cynthia, we have a few questions targeted towards the Swiss Re study for New York City. Are you aware of any efforts to expand that study to include the Boston area?
Well, I know there is a lot of interest in Boston in terms of developing more robust analyses of the risks facing our city, as well as development of climate adaptation and resiliency plans. And there are a lot of initiatives underway on that front. I'm pretty sure at this time that Swiss Re is not specifically engaged in that or doing an ECA analysis. You know, I'd be happy. I'm sure they'd love to. They're very rigorous and also, to be honest, fairly expensive. So I would probably also look at some other options, and there are other options out there.
So we are cutting into your break, but we still have a lot of really good questions here. Judy, do you want to provide some guidance on how much we can run over?
How about another 5 minutes or so?
Okay.
I figured this would be an important topic to discuss, so, yeah.
So while we're on the topic of the private insurance market, Cynthia, there are also some follow-up questions on the private insurance market pulling out of high flood risk areas. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, just bear in mind, the private insurance market doesn't write any flood coverage for homeowners or residences. They are simply not in the marketplace. They do provide flood coverage for commercial buildings as part of the commercial policies that they sell. And absolutely, though, when those risks get to a point where they are not actuarially sound, or put it another way, when the insurance premiums go above 10% of the value of that property, which is from an insurance company, at some point they might get there. Most insureds will not buy it anymore. It's too costly. So whether it's too expensive or, companies feel they just don't want to play there anymore, their withdrawal from the market is very damaging ultimately, because that risk remains and it becomes someone else's problem when there are damages and someone else's expense. So we have seen them pull out of markets, especially due to wind damage, increasing wind exposures up and down the coast, and that I'm sure will continue, and it's an issue for the industry as well.
Great, thank you. Ed, this one I'd like you to start with, and it's a good segue into the afternoon discussions. This person is interested in more of a discussion on how we can influence engineering and architectural standards in communities.
I think that like everything, it's going to be a multifaceted approach. The first thing that we can do is, I'd like to add planners into that, if I may. We heard yesterday from the Cambridge City Planner, who mentioned that the whole field of adaptation planning is a new field. We generally, in planning schools, are not teaching anything about natural hazards. That's for starters. So we need to, as Ivy suggested, we need education as a place to start. We need to educate our engineers and our architects about the limitations of the base flood level. The first time that I know that was done was last year at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where we went through in some excruciating detail the limitations of a base flood level, the confidence envelope around a base flood level compared to normal engineering requirements. Frankly, the architects that were there were flabbergasted. There was one who was talking about what that particular person had done with respect to designing a hospital campus in New York State, and he was ashen by the end. Seriously, he turned white during the presentation. So I think we need to do significant education. We need to make sure that people understand that an architect or an engineer's standard of care is very different than perhaps mere compliance with building code standards, particularly in Massachusetts. And we need to think this through very carefully and have discussions, open discussions with the client, with the architect or engineer selling the idea of safety as part of a sales effort.
I'd like to add to that, Ed. I think that, I do a lot of talking with engineers and architects in the process of planning and designing buildings. And you're right that there needs to be more of this, but I also hear from a lot of them who say, I've brought this issue up with my client, and it's a no-go.
Yeah.
They want to be as close to the water as they can be. They want to be as low as they can be. So I think it goes way beyond that. I think it goes to public education in a broader sense, rather than just saying, let's rely on the engineers and the architects. Let's rely on increasing the standards and the codes, because those are only going to happen if the public wants those changes and is accepting of them.
All good points. The other sales that I do with architects is, I was flabbergasted. We did the very first development of wave heights here in Massachusetts. The very first enforcement of substantial damage, substantial improvement ever done in the nation was done here in Massachusetts, on the Massachusetts coast. And after we did that, I was invited into one of the houses down in Situate and was flabbergasted at the difference in views. The view, and the person was in love with their view, way, way up high. So I think it's a matter of selling people on the economics, the view, and everything else we can think of to induce good behavior.
Just on that point, in terms of inducing good behavior, I just have to tell you, just about a month ago, there was a lawsuit, and the lawsuit was actually brought by one of the top 10 insurance companies in the United States. They were suing the city of Chicago and 200 surrounding towns because they said, look, you guys have developed a climate adaptation plan. You know what the risks are, and because you didn't take action and design to those flooding risks, it caused damage to insureds of ours, and we are going to come after you to pay for those. So Just to add a little more pressure into the system here, around design standards and changing expectations once there is a known risk that hasn't yet been dealt with.
Yeah, and farmers unfortunately just dropped that.
Yes.
They did drop the lawsuit, and it's very interesting. I
Very
won't
good,
take
yeah.
up more time, but they have dropped it, but I don't think it's the last.
No, it's not the last.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to wrap you all up at this point. I know the discussion could continue on the rest of the afternoon, but I'd like you all to thank our 4 presenters. And the few remaining questions, please find our presenters during the break to resolve those. And we have one quick announcement before we do release you for your beverages. Crystal Aiken, are you around? Come on down. So the governor put forward a climate initiative earlier this year and awarded the Office of Coastal Zone Management $2.3 million to provide grants to coastal communities and nonprofits to address climate adaptation issues, both from the planning perspective, but also on the ground, engineering modifications and projects. And we were very excited to award a grant to the City of Boston in partnership with the Boston Harbor Association. And Crystal is here to provide a very quick introduction to that project, which will be kicking off very soon.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Aiken, and I'm a climate change fellow at the Boston Harbor Association. So thank you for the opportunity to share my work with you. So as you know, Boston is facing an urgent situation, and I'd like to take the next minute just to tell you a little bit about the issues at hand. So over the past 18 months, 3 storms have come within hours of striking at high tide. Had that happened, we would have seen floodwaters 4 to 5 feet above high tide. Climate change and sea level rise is making this possibility all too real. So when Boston was first settled, development clustered at the waterfront to take advantage of the harbor for shipping. Unfortunately, this is also why up to a third of our city could flood repeatedly by 2100 if we do not take action. But how do we protect our city from storm surge and sea level rise? So I've spent the past year looking at how other cities are preparing for sea level rise. From my research, I've gathered over 100 examples of adaptation. Barriers, flood walls, and levees, these are the traditional solutions that come to mind first. But if there's one thing that we should have learned from the destruction of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, it's that barriers do fail. Yes, we can still use barriers. They aren't necessarily a bad thing, but we do need to add a backup plan. After Katrina, New Orleans turned to the Netherlands, a country known for its dike building, for help. Surprisingly, the Dutch are guarding against similar disasters, not with bigger, better dikes, but with living with water. In a country where 60% of the population lives below sea level, they cannot resist water forever. Instead, they are preparing for the flood. So this isn't exactly what living with water means, at least for the Dutch. So living with water means favoring resilience over resistance, recognizing the opportunity in water, being flexible to change, and ultimately making space for water. So in our report, Preparing for the Rising Tide 2, it will list the 100 examples that I found in my research, and it will also provide 12 case studies on the adaptive measures within the living with water context. In the next few minutes, I'd like to take just to give you a brief overview of a few of these living with water case study examples. Okay. So we'll just fast forward through that because I know you guys are ready to get to your break. So the Living with Water design competition, just to give you a quick idea, it is going to kick off in the fall of 2014. And it's going to be a professional design competition. The judging panel will include experts from many different countries, and there will be a $50,000 prize. We will ask design teams to pick a site, one of 3, and to design for it. And we hope that it will help to transfer some of the living with water design concepts into real live actionable items for a site. Thank you.
Just want to emphasize that the Bar Foundation is also helping co-fund this project, so public dollars are not all going to that prize money.